Greetings, nature nerds, and welcome back to Ask an Ecologist. My name is Suzanne Simpson, and I am an ecologist for Bayou Land Conservancy here in Houston, Texas. This is the first week in at least 3, maybe 4 months, where as I'm sitting here on the porch, it is just slightly cooler than it was the week before. The past few months, when I've done Ask an Ecologist and I've sat on this handy chair, I've had to put a blanket underneath me because the chair cooks so hot in the sun that I am essentially a scrambled egg. I guess that's why I'm wearing this color today. But today is the first day that I am able to forego the blanket under the legs. It is still about 90 degrees out, but we are making our way towards fall. Football starts today, which is also very exciting. So welcome. Glad to have you here this week. Let's get into your questions. We've got a few questions of just different assorted topics, and we're going to spend a little time on each of them. Our first question is, my daughter, age 10, asks if you could please talk about cacti or succulents of our area. So Ask an Ecologist comes to you from Houston, Texas, which is in the eastern part of Texas, and we actually don't have very many native cacti or succulents in this area, and that's because our climate isn't really right for that type of vegetation to grow. We have these humid, wet, clay, loamy soils that really doesn't lend itself towards a lot of different desert species. The most common cactus that you can see in this area is the eastern prickly pear. And that is a relatively medium-sized, I would say, ground cactus that has a fruit that is becoming more popular for its use in juices, and also Shiner makes a beverage that is infused with prickly pear. But other than that, most of the succulents that you see people buying at grocery stores or native plant nurseries aren't actually native to this particular area of Texas, even if they might be native to Texas generally. Big state, the further west you move, so the closer you get to the hill country, and then of course out in the Big Bend country and the Trans-Pecos, you're going to have more succulents and cacti that are growing in those areas. But we're very humid, very wet here, and we don't get a lot of them because of that. Our next question comes from Natalie Freitas, who asks, what are the steps you have to take to get an area of natural land protected by the state? There is a lot of development north of the city in Magnolia and Conroe, and the deforestation is happening very quickly. Are there resources to residents to slow this down? A good question, Natalie. The process to get a piece of land protected by the state of Texas is really quite slow and sometimes very tedious. Texas is a massive state, 96% privately owned, and the state itself, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, only has very limited resources with which to protect parcels of land. So usually land has to have some really exemplary habitat value or recreational potential for the state to invest any of their resources, even preliminarily, in looking to protect that piece of property. But there are other options available. For example, land trusts like Bayou Land Conservancy are nonprofit organizations that work with willing landowners to place conservation agreements over properties to perpetually protect their natural values. Now, this is only done voluntarily, so the land trust and the landowner have to both agree that they want to either restrict development or future uses of the property to preserve the conservation values of the property as it exists. I think you'll find that the greatest limiting resource for land conservation in our area and really nationwide is going to be funding. As soon as development comes in, land prices tend to skyrocket at that point, and it can be very difficult for organizations to raise the amount of money needed in the allotted time. Now, there are success stories of this happening. They tend to be plots of land that are also exemplary, and that's why so many people are working hard to protect them. One property that we have a conservation agreement with is the Lothar Deer Park Prairie out in Deer Park, Texas. This was a 50-acre prairie that was discovered in around 2012, 2013, and it was slated for development in 2014. And Bayou Land Conservancy partnered with a lot of organizations near and far. We also got a lot of individual donors donating, 10, 20, 50 bucks. And eventually we were able to raise enough money to buy the Lothar Deer Park Prairie, donate it to the Native Prairies Association of Texas, who is the landowner now, and then we placed a conservation easement over the property so that it's protected forever. So success stories are possible, but it is very difficult. It is difficult to prevent that, and Texas really prides itself as a state on limiting regulations for those sorts of land uses. So it takes a concerted effort and a lot of support, a lot of partnerships in order to pull something like that off. But options are out there, and if you're really motivated to get it done, it is possible. Good question. All right, John Lane asked a question, kind of a long one. He says, "Hi Suzanne, I really appreciate you doing Ask the Ecologist so much. One day, humans will have to ask this question, so I might as well ask it now, and your answer will probably help future generations. One day, Mars will warm up. At least we hope so. When it gets to that chapter in its terraforming history, humans will need and want to plant something there. What would be some of the first ones that you would suggest that we should plant? I'm going with genetically modified, fast-growing edibles. That reminds me, I need to go grocery shopping." Well, John, I must admit that prior to being asked this question, I have spent not a solitary second of time considering the answer. But we're going to have some fun with this question because it's a very unique, very interesting concept. I tend to agree with you off the top that perhaps our best foray into Martian gardening would be some sort of like a Mars victory gardening where people can grow food to eat. If you go to Mars and you forget to pack a lunch, it's going to be a very short trip. There are studies and experiments that have taken place in different universities, like Vanderbilt University, I know, has done some of this, where soil that is simulating the soil on the planet of Mars has been used to grow different types of edible crops. So kale, sweet potatoes, peas have all been reasonably successfully grown in small batches using soil that is likened to the soil on Mars. So I think that would be a good starting point. But in order for anything to be grown or consumed on a large scale, we're going to have to do some serious soil amendments, because there are some toxic elements to the soil on Mars that if we keep consuming that food, we would get poisoned eventually. And to prevent that, you'd have to do a lot of adjusting to the soil there. So you may actually want to bring some of your own fertilizer while you're packing your Mars lunch. A good piece of good news, though, is that one of the plants that seemed to grow well in these Martian gardens were hops. So Martian craft brews are possible. So I would say that's a good place to start. And if we could figure that out, then surely we can just turn Mars into a giant longleaf pine savanna. I think that would be fun too, but that's just my 2 cents. Great questions this week, very fun. I hope that you guys will continue to submit questions. You can leave us a comment, you can send us a Facebook message, you can email us at info@bayouland.org. Remember that all past episodes of Ask an Ecologist are also available on Bayou Land Conservancy's YouTube page, so check us out there, and I'll see you next week. Thanks for hanging out.